On a rainy night, a poor waitress slipped on the street, never knowing the man who caught her would change her life forever. The morning rush always arrived like a storm. Coffee cups clinked, the old radio hummed half in tune, and Lena moved between tables with a rhythm learned from exhaustion. She balanced 3 plates on one arm, smiled at a couple arguing over toast, and refilled a trucker's mug before he could ask. The smell of burnt bacon and cheap perfume wrapped around her like a second uniform. Her name tag had faded to a blur, but people still called her Sweetheart. It was easier than remembering her name. She'd been at this diner for 5 years, long enough to know which booth's light flickered, which customer never tipped, and which order the cook always burned. Her sneakers had holes, patched twice with glue, and every step on the greasy floor made her knees ache. But each night, when tips clattered into her jar, she counted them carefully, whispering numbers that never quite reached her goal. Those few bills went straight to her mother's medicine, rent, and a jar labeled Future School. The jar was almost empty now, but she kept it visible, hope in glass form. Outside, the world felt faster and shinier than she could afford. The city lights reflected on wet pavement, creating illusions of gold she couldn't touch. Lena often paused on her walk home, staring up at the glass towers where executives worked late under clean, bright light. She imagined the smell of their offices, air conditioning, and expensive coffee. For a moment, she let herself dream. Maybe one day she'd serve guests in a grand hotel, not this tired diner that closed when the neon flickered out. Her phone buzzed, a message from the pharmacy reminding her about her mother's refill. Another reminder of how fragile everything was. She sighed, adjusted her bag, and kept walking. A cold wind pushed against her thin jacket. She tugged it tighter, wishing she'd saved enough for a proper coat. The diner's owner, Mrs. Harris, often said Lena was too nice for her own good. Maybe that was true. When customers left extra food, she packed it for the homeless man who waited near the bus stop. When her co-worker's shift ran late, she covered it without complaint. It was easier to help others than to think about how stuck she felt herself. Still, beneath the quiet resignation, a small ember of determination burned. She promised herself that one day, somehow, her kindness would count for something more than tired feet and long nights. Maybe a scholarship, maybe a new start. She didn't know when, but she believed life couldn't always stay this hard. Rain began to fall as she turned the corner to her apartment. The sky was the same color as the street, dull, metallic, heavy. She stepped over a puddle, laughing softly at her own reflection rippling in the water. Tomorrow would be another 12-hour shift, another chance to keep trying. She didn't know that just blocks away, a man in an expensive coat was finishing a late meeting, heading into the same night that carried her home. Their worlds were about to collide, one slippery step at a time. Rain hammered the diner windows long after closing time, blurring the neon sign into a trembling glow. Lena wiped the last table, wrung the rag, and hung her apron on its hook. The tip jar was light tonight, barely enough for bus fare and a carton of milk. She slipped the coins into her pocket, switched off the lights, and pushed through the glass door into the cold, wet night. The city smelled of asphalt and distant coffee. Her jacket, too thin to fight the chill, clung to her shoulders like paper. She hurried down the sidewalk, head bowed against the rain, shoes squeaking with every step. Water pooled near the gutter, catching the reflection of passing cars. Each splash soaked her hem a little more. At the corner, she paused beneath a flickering street lamp, balancing a small tray of leftovers she planned to give to the man who often slept behind the cafe. Her fingers were stiff, but her heart softened, thinking he'd have a warm meal tonight. As she stepped off the curb, a horn blared. Startled, she turned, and her foot met a slick patch of oil. Time slowed. The tray flew from her hands, the container burst open, and coins scattered across the wet street like tiny stars. Her body tilted backward, arms flailing. A cry left her throat before she felt it, a firm grip catching her wrist, steadying her fall. "Got you," a deep voice said, calm but certain. For a second, all Lena could hear was rain hitting fabric and her own startled heartbeat. She blinked up at the stranger. His coat was dark and expensive, the kind worn by people who didn't count coins at night. His tie was loosened, hair damp, but his eyes, warm and attentive, studied her with quiet concern. "Are you hurt?" he asked. I'm fine," she stammered, cheeks flushed. "Just clumsy." She knelt quickly to gather the coins, embarrassed by the mess. He bent beside her, helping wordlessly, his leather shoes soaking in the puddle. "You should be more careful," he said gently, handing her a wet dollar bill. "It's late. These streets get slippery." "Yeah," she whispered, clutching the tray's bent edge. "I'll manage." "Thank you for catching me," he smiled faintly. "Least I could do." When she looked up again, his face was half hidden beneath the shadow of his umbrella. Something about him, his calm, his presence, felt out of place in her world. She gave a nervous laugh, said goodbye, and hurried off toward the dim lights of her apartment block. Behind her, the man stayed where he was, watching until she turned the corner. The rain softened to drizzle. He glanced at the coins still lying in the gutter, then at the diner's faint sign across the street. "Lena," he murmured, having read her name on the tag pinned to her apron. The sound of it lingered as he stepped back under the awning, curiosity flickering behind his composed eyes. He had caught her by chance, or maybe by something more deliberate, and as the city lights shimmered in puddles around him, he found himself wondering why he couldn't just walk away. Ethan Cole hadn't planned to stop that night. His driver had offered to take a different route, but he'd wanted to walk, to feel the pulse of the city he rarely touched anymore. After years in corner offices and boardrooms, success had started to feel sterile, measured only in profit margins and polite applause. Yet the image of the waitress he'd caught in the rain, the way she'd smiled despite soaked clothes and scattered coins, had stayed with him through the night like an unfinished question. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the windows of his penthouse suite, landing across a stack of reports. Each one spoke of declining guest satisfaction, uninspired staff, and fading warmth across his hotel chain. He skimmed the words, hearing his executive team's rehearsed phrases in his head. "We're optimizing efficiency," they'd said. But numbers didn't capture what he'd seen in the eyes of that waitress. Efficiency couldn't buy sincerity. By mid-morning, he'd made a decision that would puzzle his assistant and infuriate his board if they knew. He traded his tailored suit for jeans and a plain jacket, tucked a cap low over his face, and left the luxury hotel that bore his initials on every towel. For years, he'd run the empire behind glass walls. Today, he would return to the ground floor, incognito. The diner looked even smaller in daylight. The neon buzzed weakly above the door, and a paper sign announced today's special. Pancakes, $3.99. He pushed through the door, the scent of brewed coffee and fried butter wrapping around him. A radio murmured old tunes. Behind the counter, Lena wiped a table, her hair pulled back, a few strands escaping near her cheek. She looked tired but composed, like someone who'd learned to hide exhaustion behind grace. He took a seat at the corner booth. When she approached, recognition flickered for a moment in her eyes, then faded. She served so many faces, one kind stranger wouldn't stand out. "Morning," she greeted, setting down a menu. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," Ethan said, his tone casual. "Whatever's hot." She poured him a cup, steam curling between them. He noticed her careful hands, the small burn mark near her wrist, the way she double-checked the sugar jar before leaving it on the table. Every gesture was precise, genuine, and unhurried, a quiet professionalism no training manual could teach. He ordered pancakes, the cheapest meal, just to watch how she worked. While she moved between tables, greeting regulars, refilling mugs and offering napkins with practiced ease, Ethan found himself studying the rhythm of her world. No boardroom presentation had ever felt this honest. When she returned with his plate, he thanked her, meaning it more deeply than she'd ever know. She smiled, nodding politely before rushing off to answer the bell from another table. Ethan took a sip of coffee, grimacing at its bitterness but strangely comforted by it. He could have been anywhere. A 5-star brunch, a luxury meeting, but something about this diner, about her, held him still. She'd slipped once, yet somehow stood taller than most people he knew. And Ethan, the man who owned hundreds of polished hotels, realized he'd never really understood service until now. The lunch crowd came in waves. Construction workers, delivery drivers, a few office clerks escaping their cubicles. The diner buzzed with chatter and clinking dishes, yet Lena moved through it like calm water, patient and steady. Ethan sat quietly in his corner booth, nursing his second cup of bitter coffee. From behind a newspaper, he watched her, not with judgment, but fascination. Each time she smiled, something unspoken shifted in the room. It wasn't the kind of smile trained for customer service. It was real, the kind that made strangers feel seen. Near the door, an elderly man shuffled in, his jacket soaked from a passing drizzle. He looked around as if unsure whether he belonged. Lena noticed instantly. She greeted him with the same warmth she gave everyone else, guiding him to a seat near the window. "You sit. I'll get you something warm," she said softly. Ethan saw the hesitation in the man's trembling hands as he reached for his wallet. There were only a few crumpled bills inside. Lena returned with soup and toast before he even ordered. When he tried to hand her the money, she shook her head, smiling. "Don't worry about it. Someone already covered you today." She slipped the few bills back into his pocket like a secret. The old man's eyes watered. "You're an angel, miss," he whispered. Lena laughed gently. "Just someone who hates seeing cold soup go to waste." Ethan felt a flicker of shame. He'd sat in board meetings where executives discussed customer empathy as if it were a marketing term. Yet here was a waitress earning minimum wage who lived that principle without even thinking about it. She wasn't selling kindness. She was giving it freely. Moments later, her manager, Mrs. Harris, appeared from the kitchen, frowning. "Lena, you can't keep giving food away," she scolded loud enough for customers to hear. "This isn't a charity." Lena lowered her eyes, nodding. "I'm sorry, it won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," the woman snapped. Retreating to the back, Ethan expected Lena's smile to fade, but it didn't. Instead, she turned back to the elderly man, making sure his tea stayed hot. The quiet dignity in her movement struck him harder than any lecture about leadership ever had. When she brought Ethan his check, she apologized for the delay. "Sorry, it's been a bit busy today." "No apology needed," he replied. "You handle it well." She offered a modest grin, wiped the table, and hurried to help another customer. Ethan watched her go, realizing that the people who made the world run often went unseen until someone chose to look closely. He took out his wallet, slid a few crisp $100 bills under the check, and wrote nothing. No name, no note. Just gratitude left in silence. As he stepped into the afternoon light, he glanced back through the diner window. Lena was already clearing another table, her focus unbroken, her kindness undimmed. He'd built an empire teaching hospitality, but she reminded him what it truly meant. And though she didn't know it, her small gestures had just planted the seed of change that would ripple through his entire company. The news came on a Tuesday morning, tucked between coffee refills and cracked eggshells. Mrs. Harris emerged from the kitchen with red eyes and a crumpled notice in her hand. The diner would be closing in 2 weeks. Rent hikes, unpaid taxes, a landlord who'd lost patience. The words hit harder than any scolding ever had. The regulars murmured sympathy, but by noon the place already felt like a ghost of itself. Chairs scraped, lights flickered, and dreams dissolved quietly between orders. Lena kept working until the last plate was washed. When the final customer left, she lingered at her favorite booth, running her fingers over the worn formica edge. It had been more than a job. It was the only rhythm she knew. Every bill she'd paid, every smile she'd forced on bad days, all started here. Now even that was slipping away. Outside, rain threatened again. She sat on the curb, balancing her umbrella against her shoulder, counting the coins from her apron pocket. Not even enough for groceries. The streets buzzed with neon and life that no longer included her. She closed her eyes, imagining a tiny bakery with soft lights, shelves of fresh bread, and a corner table where no one ever got turned away for lack of money. In that picture she could breathe. A sleek black car slowed near the curb. She didn't notice until the door opened and polished shoes stepped out, splashing puddles. The man who approached carried confidence the way others carried umbrellas, naturally. He wore a grey suit, simple but too perfect for this street. "Excuse me?" he said, voice calm, familiar in a way she couldn't place. "Are you Miss Lena?" She blinked. "Yes." "Do I know you?" "Not yet," he smiled. "I'm Ethan Reed. I consult for small hospitality ventures. I heard about the diner's closure. I was wondering if the owner might be open to selling." Mrs. Harris was already gone for the night, but Lena, startled, led him inside. The neon light painted the empty booths in faded pink. Ethan looked around, noting every detail: the cracked counter, the smell of coffee embedded in the walls, the charm beneath decay. "It has potential," he murmured. Lena laughed softly. "Potential's the one thing no one here could afford." He turned to her. "If it were yours, what would you do with it?" The question took her off guard. She hesitated, then spoke with quiet conviction. "I'd turn it into a bakery. Simple food, fair prices. People could eat, even if they were short on money. Maybe let the community help run it someday." Ethan listened, hands folded. Her eyes glowed when she talked, the way they hadn't when she'd been serving coffee. He didn't interrupt, just memorized every word. When she finished, she looked embarrassed. "It's just a dream. I know it sounds silly." "It doesn't," he said gently. "It sounds overdue." As she locked up behind them, she thanked him for listening, thinking he was just another polite stranger. He walked back to his car, heart steady but mind racing. He wasn't just listening to her dreams, he was already planning how to make them real. But he knew that revealing the truth too soon could shatter everything before it began. 2 days after their meeting, Lena received a call that didn't sound real. The voice on the line introduced herself as Clara, an assistant from a hospitality company. They'd heard about her work ethic from a professional contact and wanted to offer her a temporary front desk position at one of their city hotels. No interview, no paperwork, just a 2-week trial. The pay was triple what she made at the diner. She nearly dropped her phone. "I think there's been a mistake," she said. "There isn't," Clara replied smoothly. "We'd like to see what you can do." That evening, Lena took the bus to the address they gave her, a gleaming glass tower downtown with golden letters spelling the Royal Crest. She hesitated outside, feeling small beneath its height. Guests swept through the doors in tailored suits and dresses. She adjusted her thrifted blouse, praying no one could tell it cost $5 from a clearance bin. Inside, chandeliers spilled light across polished marble floors. A concierge greeted her, directing her to the front desk manager. Everyone seemed too busy to notice her nerves. When she put on the hotel uniform, crisp and freshly pressed, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The first days were overwhelming. Guests spoke fast, sometimes rudely, but she smiled through each encounter. Her natural warmth seemed to soften even the impatient ones. She learned computer systems by staying late, asking questions no one expected her to. The other staff, polished and proper, exchanged glances behind her back. "A temp from a diner," one whispered. "She'll last a week." But guests began requesting her by name. "The girl with the kind eyes," someone said. A couple extended their stay after she helped find their lost luggage. A business traveler left a note thanking her for remembering his wife's birthday. Every compliment felt surreal, like small lights leading her somewhere she hadn't known existed. Ethan watched it all quietly from a distance. He came often, blending with guests, pretending to check on operations. No one questioned the man who looked like a consultant. He saw how quickly Lena adapted, how she treated the wealthy with the same grace she'd shown the old man in the diner. She didn't chase approval. She gave care instinctively. Each success made him prouder and more conflicted. When their eyes met across the lobby one afternoon, he looked away too quickly. She'd started recognizing him, though she couldn't quite place where from. Her smile when greeting him was polite, professional, but it lingered a second longer than with others. That night, alone in his office overlooking the city, Ethan reread her personnel report. Under temporary supervision, exceptional guest satisfaction. He closed the file, guilt tightening in his chest. He'd promised himself this test was harmless, a chance to reward her potential. But watching her thrive in a world that was secretly his made the lie harder to carry. He told himself he'd reveal the truth soon. Just not yet. Not until she believed she'd earned this life on her own. It began as whispers, soft enough to dismiss at first, then sharp enough to wound. The staff had started talking. Why did the new girl get glowing reviews, private meetings with management, and flexible shifts? One co-worker, a front desk attendant named Marissa, wore jealousy like perfume, strong and noticeable. She'd worked at the Royal Crest for 3 years without a single mention in the quarterly reports. But Lena, 2 weeks in and everyone seemed to love her. Marissa's curiosity turned bitter. Late one evening, she lingered after closing, sorting files that weren't hers to see. That's when she found an email chain marked confidential. The sender's name froze her. Ethan Cole, the CEO of the entire royal chain. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the messages, references to a temporary staff placement and notes about field performance observation. Her heart pounded. The man who occasionally stopped by pretending to be a consultant was the man who owned the company. And the waitress turned hotel clerk, she was his secret project. By morning, screenshots of the emails had made their way to a gossip blog that thrived on corporate scandals. CEO's secret romance, hidden connection between hotel billionaire and unknown staff member. The headline spread faster than truth ever could. Lena found out the worst way possible. Her co-workers' stares followed her the moment she entered the lobby. Phones tilted her way, whispers hissed behind manicured hand. She forced a smile, unaware of the article until the front desk manager slid a printout across the counter. "You might want to see this," he said gently. The room tilted as she read. Each word blurred. CEO, secret, chosen, affair. Her hands trembled. She remembered Ethan's voice, his kindness, the offer that changed her life. Every gesture now felt poisoned by deceit. That evening, she stormed into the executive office where Ethan was meeting his team. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice broke. "Was I an experiment? A story you could fix and feel good about?" Ethan dismissed the others and rose to meet her. "Lena, please. It wasn't like that. I wanted you to see what you were capable of without influence, without pity." She shook her head, tears mixing with fury. "You let me believe I earned this on my own, but it was your world all along." "You were testing me. I was helping you," he insisted, his voice quiet, pained. "You deserved the chance, then why lie?" she whispered. "You of all people should know what dignity means." There was nothing he could say. The silence between them grew heavy until she turned, walking out before he could stop her. By dawn, her locker was empty. Her resignation letter sat folded neatly on the front desk. No goodbyes, no explanations, just finality. 2 days later, the small apartment she'd rented was vacated. The neighbors said she'd left with her mother, heading for a coastal town 3 hours away. Ethan stood at her now empty workspace, staring at the name tag she'd left behind. The truth had come out, but not the way he'd hoped. Sometimes good intentions cut deeper than cruelty ever could. The scandal lingered longer than Ethan expected. For months, the internet refused to forget. Articles spun tales of favoritism and hidden affairs, dissecting every interaction caught on camera. The Royal Crest's reputation, once polished and untouchable, was suddenly fragile. Board members demanded statements, publicists drafted apologies, but Ethan refused every suggestion. He cancelled events, avoided interviews, and locked himself away in his office. The company could recover. His conscience couldn't. In quiet moments, he replayed that night, Lena's voice cracking, her eyes full of betrayal. He hadn't meant to hurt her. He'd only wanted to help. But intention meant little when trust was gone. The hotel floors gleamed as always, yet to him, every surface reflected her absence. She had embodied everything he claimed to build: humility, grace, and humanity. And now, those virtues seemed to have left with her. He wandered through his empty penthouse at midnight, city lights sprawling beyond the glass. In the distance, the streets looked like rivers of gold, beautiful but unreachable. He wondered if Lena still passed similar streets at night, dreaming of something simpler. Sometimes he caught himself imagining her laughter drifting through his lobby again, the quiet warmth that had once softened the cold edges of his world. But the silence that followed those thoughts was heavy, almost punishing. Meanwhile, far from the city's noise, Lena had begun a different kind of healing. The coastal town was small, 2 bakeries, 1 school, and a community that still believed in helping neighbors. Her mother's health improved slowly in the sea air, and though money was scarce, peace was plentiful. With leftover ingredients from the local cafe where she volunteered, Lena started teaching neighborhood kids how to bake on weekends. They arrived with sticky fingers and big dreams, giggling as flour filled the air. She taught them to knead dough, measure sugar, and share whatever they made. The first rule, she'd tell them, is to never waste food when someone else might be hungry. They'd nod, wide-eyed, as if she were revealing a secret. One afternoon, a local photographer stopped by to take pictures for the town newsletter. He captured Lena surrounded by children, all smiling proudly beside their trays of pastries. The photo accompanied a small story titled, "Former City Waitress Brings Warmth to Local Kids." It described her free baking lessons and her philosophy that kindness feeds more than hunger. Weeks later, that very newsletter landed on Ethan's desk, forwarded accidentally by a regional manager who thought he'd appreciate the community outreach feature. At first, he almost deleted it, assuming it was just another charity update. But the image caught him. Lena, hair tied back, flour dusting her cheek, laughing with children who looked at her like sunlight. He read the caption twice, disbelief turning to ache. She'd built something new, something pure without him. And yet, her words beneath the photograph, "Everyone deserves a second chance to rise," felt like a whisper meant for both of them. That night, for the first time in months, Ethan made a decision. The silence between them had gone on long enough. The ballroom shimmered with golden lights and murmured conversations. It was one of those charity galas where every guest wore elegance like armor, and every donation came with applause. Ethan stood near the back, glass untouched, scanning the buffet table without really seeing it. The evening's proceeds were meant for community development, a cause he'd quietly supported since stepping away from public view. But as a waiter passed with a tray of desserts, something on a small card caught his eye. "Baked with love by Lena's Community Kitchen." The words froze him. Beneath them sat a tray of simple pastries, flaky, imperfect, dusted unevenly with powdered sugar. They looked nothing like the polished desserts his hotels served, yet somehow they drew more attention. Guests whispered compliments, taking seconds. Ethan's heart stumbled. He picked up one tart, half afraid it would vanish if he blinked. A volunteer confirmed the name belonged to a small-town bakery initiative a few hours away. He thanked her, already certain what he had to do. That night, he cancelled his remaining meetings and drove toward the coast, guided by an address on the back of the dessert label. The next afternoon, Lena was kneading dough when a familiar car pulled up outside the small community center. She looked up, frowning as the door opened, and Ethan stepped out, no suit this time, just a plain shirt, sleeves rolled, humility written across his face. The children recognized the luxury car before she did, scattering toward the windows. He paused by the doorway, unsure if he should enter. "I came to see the person who made those desserts," he said softly. "I think I've been following your recipe for a long time without realizing it." Her hands stilled. The silence between them felt heavier than the months that had passed. "You found me," she said, voice steady but distant. "I wasn't looking to apologize," he began, then caught himself. "Or maybe I was in my own way. But more than that, I wanted to offer something real. A partnership," she raised an eyebrow. "A partnership?" "I've been funding new outreach programs," he explained. "But they lack a heartbeat, something human." "You've built that here. I'd like to expand your idea, create community bakeries across our hotel network, run by women who need a second chance. Single mothers, struggling families." "You'd lead it. Call it—" "Project Grace." Lena wiped flour from her hands, studying him. "You don't need me for that." He met her gaze. "You're wrong. I need someone who remembers why kindness matters when profit doesn't." For the first time, she saw no pretense in his eyes. No polished CEO, no strategist, just a man who'd learned humility through loss. She wanted to stay guarded, but the sincerity in his voice cracked something she thought had healed shut. "This time," she said slowly, "I make the rules." He nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." He hadn't come to plead or explain. He'd come to rebuild. And for the first time, Lena believed the offer wasn't born of guilt, but respect. For weeks, Lena wrestled with the decision. Ethan's proposal had sounded sincere, but the past still echoed too loudly. Every time she remembered how his lie had humiliated her, anger rose like a tide. Yet each day, another delivery arrived, new ovens for the center, bags of flour labeled "Donated by the Royal Foundation," uniforms stitched with Project Grace. He never called, never pressured, only acted. The silence of his apology was what struck her most. Her mother noticed, before she admitted it herself. "People can't undo what they've done," she said gently, while folding linens near the kitchen window. "But sometimes they try to mend it piece by piece." "You taught him that?" Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe he just has guilt to spare." "Even guilt can build something good," her mother replied. "Forgiveness isn't letting go for them, it's letting go for you." Those words lingered like music she couldn't stop hearing. 2 months later, Project Grace officially launched. The community center had transformed, fresh paint, polished counters, laughter echoing through every room. Local women who once doubted their worth now wore aprons with pride, baking pastries for nearby hotels. Children helped wrap bread for donation drives. Lena moved among them, checking ovens, praising small successes. When the opening day arrived, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon and hope. Reporters, city officials, and hotel executives gathered under a white canopy. Ethan stood quietly off stage, avoiding cameras, dressed simply. He hadn't wanted to speak. "This is your story," he told her earlier. "Not mine." As Lena stepped to the podium, the murmurs quieted. She gripped the edges, her pulse quick but steady. The crowd expected the usual gratitude speech, thank the sponsors, praise the donors, but she had something different to say. "2 years ago," she began, "I worked at a diner that was falling apart. I served strangers and dreamed small. Then someone gave me a chance, though not the way I expected. It wasn't an easy road. Mistakes were made by both of us. But the lesson I learned is this: sometimes people cross your path to remind you that kindness is stronger than pride." Her eyes drifted toward Ethan. "Forgiveness doesn't make you weaker," she continued softly. "It makes you free." The applause started gently, then grew until it filled the hall. Ethan lowered his head, humbled. When she stepped down, he met her halfway. Cameras clicked as they shook hands, but the gesture wasn't for show. It was quiet, steady, and human, an unspoken truce between two people who had broken and rebuilt in different ways. Later, as the crowd mingled, Lena found her mother near the window, eyes misty. "You did good," she whispered. Lena looked out at the families laughing, the ovens glowing, and Ethan speaking with volunteers like an ordinary man. "No," she said softly. "We did good." The waitress who once slipped in the rain now stood tall beneath bright lights. Her world had changed, not because she'd found a hero, but because she'd learned to forgive one. 6 months later, the scent of fresh bread had become the heartbeat of 100 towns. Project Grace had blossomed beyond anyone's expectation, part bakery, part safe haven. Each location bore the same quiet promise: no one left hungry, no one left unseen. The initiative wasn't built on profit margins, but on shared humanity. And that made it unstoppable. Lena moved through one of the new branches in Chicago, flour dusting her apron, laughter following her like sunlight. The workers, mostly single mothers and retirees, looked at her not as a boss, but as someone who had walked where they'd walked. Every recipe, every rule carried her touch. "Bake with heart," she'd say. "That's the only ingredient people remember." The walls of the shop were covered in photos: children with sticky fingers, families sharing loaves, women signing their first paychecks. A framed picture near the register showed the original community kitchen by the coast, the place where it all began. Whenever Lena looked at it, she felt something beyond pride, gratitude, a reminder that falling once hadn't broken her. It had redirected her. Meanwhile, Ethan had transformed just as quietly. He'd resigned from the board, citing creative differences, though everyone knew he was tired of boardroom applause. His new office was a modest workspace above one of the bakeries, where he handled logistics and funding. Most employees didn't even know who he was. He preferred it that way. On some mornings, he'd slip into a bakery unannounced, dressed casually, blending with regulars. Sometimes he bought coffee, sometimes he just watched. How customers greeted staff by name, how laughter replaced the stiff politeness of luxury hotels. Once a little girl offered him a cookie for free. "Lena says kindness always comes back," she told him. He smiled, tucking the cookie into his pocket like a medal. When he and Lena met now, it wasn't in conference rooms, but kitchens. They'd discuss shipments over tea, argue about flour costs, and share quiet smiles when things went right. Their connection had changed shape, less about saving, more about sharing. One afternoon, he arrived early to a training session in New York. From the doorway, he watched Lena guide a group of new hires through their first bake. Her voice was steady, patient, warm. "We're not just teaching recipes," she told them. "We're teaching people that kindness is contagious." Ethan lingered until she noticed him. "Still sneaking around?" she teased. "Old habits," he replied with a grin. Though this time, no disguises, she laughed, shaking her head. "Good. We've had enough of those." He looked around at the buzzing kitchen, the ovens glowing like hearths. "You built this," he said quietly. "We built this," she corrected. Outside, the city roared with traffic, but inside, the sound of whirring mixers and soft conversation created something rare. A peace they both had to earn. He had once caught her when she fell. Now she helped thousands stand tall. And though success had found them both, it was humility and kindness that finally let them rest. A year had passed since that rainy night, the one that started everything with a stumble. On this anniversary, the morning light fell over the same street where coins had once scattered across wet pavement. But the street looked different now. The diner was no longer shuttered or silent. In its place stood a small cafe painted in warm tones of cream and gold, its sign swinging gently above the door, Second Chance Cafe. Inside, the smell of coffee mingled with freshly baked bread. The walls were lined with photos from the bakery initiative, faces of women, children, and families who had found their footing again. The air buzzed with laughter and soft music. A handwritten note framed near the counter read, "No one leaves hungry." Lena moved between tables in her apron, her steps confident, her smile unforced. The cafe didn't belong to any corporation. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been told they'd failed. Today's event was special. Free meals for anyone who walked in. No reservations, no bills, just warmth. The bell above the door chimed softly. She looked up and saw him, Ethan, carrying 2 paper boxes and wearing that same quiet expression that once belonged to a man trying to understand the world he'd built. Time had softened him. The sharpness of power had given way to something simpler, humbler. "You're late," she said with mock sternness, wiping her hands on her apron. He smiled. "Old habits. But I brought the pastries myself this time." She took the boxes, their fingers brushing briefly, a touch that spoke more than words. Together they arranged the trays on the counter, filling the air with the scent of butter and sugar. Then, without ceremony, they started serving. She poured coffee. He handed out rolls. Between them, a rhythm formed, the same unspoken teamwork that had once saved an empire and a heart. A woman with tired eyes approached the counter, hesitant. "I don't have money," she murmured. Lena smiled softly. "You don't need it here. Just appetite." Ethan watched her, the same awe flickering across his face that he'd felt the first night he caught her. Only this time, it wasn't surprise, it was recognition. As the afternoon sun angled through the window, a reporter stopped by, drawn by the crowd spilling onto the sidewalk. "What's the story behind this place?" she asked. Lena glanced at Ethan, then at the sign above the door. "It's simple," she said. "One fall doesn't define you. Getting back up does," the reporter smiled, jotting it down, unaware those words had once been her private promise to herself. Later, as the last guests left, Ethan locked the front door and turned off the open sign. They stood together in the golden quiet, the hum of the city outside soft and forgiving. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "But not for the fall, only for what came after." He nodded, eyes warm. "And somewhere in that kindness," he murmured, "we both found home." Outside, the sign swayed gently under the evening breeze, built for second chances. The lights dimmed, the music faded, and for the first time in a long time, both hearts were completely still, finally at peace.